a member of the crowd grabbed me, and I remember hearing him yell out, I got one. Kill him with his gun.
I looked back to my right and Mike was gone. He just wasn't there anymore.
I got one!
I remember just kind of getting pounded from every side. And then I remember people yelling out to get his gun, kill him with his gun. And then I started getting tased at the base of my skull. And it was excruciatingly painful. I remember yelling out that I had kids, trying to appeal to somebody's humanity. And it worked. And ultimately, I think that led to my survival.
Which way do you want to go? Which way do you want to go? Back inside. You want to go back inside? I got it. It's my partner. Come on.
I just remember the whole time thinking like he was gone.
Mike, stay in there, buddy. Mike, it's Jimmy. I'm here. Mike. Come on, dude. Come on, Mike. Come on, buddy. We're going duck hunting soon.
I mean, I had no idea at that point the extent of my injuries, only that, I was up. What I most struggle with is, kind of some of the emotional after effects or psychological trauma. And it certainly doesn't help when, elected leaders won't even acknowledge that it occurred. I still haven't made sense of it.
We're going to let Michael introduce himself to you, and then we'll turn to your
Yeah, so obviously most of you probably know me from such historical events as the insurrection at the Capitol. But I was born in Washington, D.C. I was raised in Northern Virginia. I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out after my freshman year. I went into the trades. And I started as a journeyman carpenter with United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners in a local just outside of Washington, D.C. in suburban Maryland. And eventually I became a journeyman carpenter. I found myself in Washington, D.C. on 9/11. I remember exactly where I was. I remember exactly the conversations that I had in the moments leading up to the planes striking the towers, and I remember how deeply impacted I was by that event, as probably everybody in this room was, and that changed the trajectory of my life. I wanted to serve, and I chose the United States Capitol Police. That being said, I loved the profession. I did not like my employer. And so after a year to the day, I lateraled to the more traditional law enforcement agency in Washington, D.C., which was the Metropolitan Police Department. I love that job very much. And I spent almost 2 decades there, primarily working in special mission units that focused on violent criminal apprehension, narcotics traffickers, and illegal firearms. And then fast forward 20 years to January 6th. I had no expectation of being involved in the events of that day. Like I said, I worked in a small mission unit. We were involved in a narcotics investigation, and that was what was on the dry erase board for the day. I was going to buy drugs for the government. And then, I was aware of what was happening. Obviously, our department was on, full deployment for the day. Days off were canceled. Leave was restricted. But in Washington, D.C., there's a protest that takes place 365 days a year. And so this is not so uncommon. And then I remember getting the first phone calls from colleagues, specifically when the initial West Front perimeter was breached and cops were being assaulted. I remember turning on my radio and listening to the distress calls coming out from officers. And I made the decision that, like literally hundreds of other DC cops, I was going to self-deploy to the Capitol. I drove to work, put on a uniform, something I hadn't done in 10 years. And my partner, Jimmy Albright, and I, who's the ugly redheaded guy that you saw in that video, we went. And I guess the rest is history. I'm sure most of you are familiar, but I found myself in the Lower West Terrace Tunnel, which, for those of you that are familiar, was kind of the apex or this, pinnacle of the fighting that took place that day. It was 40 or 50 law enforcement officers versus a crowd of 15,000. And they all seemed to be trying to get into that one doorway. I eventually was pulled from the police line. I was restrained, beaten, struck with a taser device multiple times. I lost consciousness. I suffered a traumatic brain injury, actually the 7th of my law enforcement career, and I had a heart attack. I spent 3 days in the hospital, and about 9 months after that, recovering not just from the physical injuries, but I think more from the psychological trauma of experiencing that, but then experiencing the denialism in the aftermath. And then seeing the effects, not just on myself, but on my colleagues. Hundreds of police officers left the profession in the aftermath of January 6th. Hundreds. I don't know very many DC cops from my time there on the department that are still there. And it's not all due to retirements. It's due to, officers that were just disgusted with, with the way that those politicians, people that they protected that day, betrayed them and continue to betray them to this very day.
So this is a very fitting question. An audience member says, I remember seeing you on MS Now giving an interview from your home. You were as chagrined as I've ever seen you. You indicated you would hole up on your mountain and not come out. What made you come out?
It's a long story, but
we got time.
So pretty much my entire career, I either lived in Washington, D.C. when I was a D.C. cop, or I lived in Baltimore. And the moment that I got out of the police department, I've always enjoyed, I'm an outdoors person. I like hunting, fishing, hiking, doing that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, if I'm not in the police department anymore, I'm going to deal with that commute. I'm going to move as far the fuck away from Washington, D.C. as humanly possible. And so, like, I picked this really nice spot in Haymarket, Virginia, on top of Bull Run Mountain. And it was very secluded. My driveway was like 350 yards long. You know, my neighbors were black bears and deer and turkeys. And so, like, and I had my dogs. And so that's where I was. And then 2 years into it, it got too isolated. I found myself just like completely retracting from people, and it got worse. You know, the worse the condition of the country got. It got really bad after the last election, mainly just because I had been using my story for the better part of, I don't know, 4 years at that point, like my experience, which, by the way, I have mixed feelings about. Like, what you experience, or what I experienced, and what you saw in that video. I'm sure a lot of you look at it and it's like it's harrowing, and like, I looked at it as like it's humiliating. You know, I'm a cop. I've experienced traumatic situations countless times in the past. Never once did I feel like I was not in control of the outcome of that situation. This time, didn't have control over it. And not only that, the worst part about it is the control belonged to a bunch of bumbling fucking idiots. Like, those were the people who, like, my life was placed in their hands. And so it was difficult. It's not like I go out and I'm like, look at me, like, look at what I did. Like, I got my ass kicked. I almost lost my life. I'm screaming in pain. My voice is cracking and breaking. Like, this is not the masculine image that I want to portray to the world. But I recognized the significance of that, and how useful it could be to convince people that what happened that day was really violent. And, you know, it was literally the worst moment in this country in my lifetime. And so, yeah.
Well, pertinent to that, we have someone who talks a little bit about the people around them who drank the Kool-Aid. I genuinely do not believe that January 6th ever happened. So they are asking what they can do to convince people that January 6th happened.
Nothing. There's nothing you can do. And in fact, I encourage you to cease all efforts to educate anybody about the realities of January 6th. Cease all, you know, there's no reason to engage. If people haven't come to the conclusion that January 6th happened and that it was violent, with all the, you know, insurmountable evidence, all the witness testimony, all of the things that, you know, that have been done to educate the American people, they're never going to come to that conclusion. The same thing with this administration and with the MAGA movement. If you're not going to accept the fact that the things that are happening in this country are bad and they're anti-American, they go against the fundamental core of who we are as Americans. And if you can't accept that, then I don't know. It's not about educating you. It's about defeating you. It's about defeating you. And maybe later on in life, you'll have, you know, some self-reflection and come to the realization that you were wrong. But I don't really care. The only thing that I care about is that you're not in charge of my future or my children's future. Like, your warped, racist ideas are not going to be in, you know, crafting the direction of this country. And I tell people all the time, like, listen, you know, we can't just kill them. But if you want to be a racist in this country, you've got free speech. Now, I will say that there are, you know, consequences to that. But I just want you to live here, shut the fuck up, and pay your taxes. and not be engaged in our political discourse, and certainly not have any say-so in the direction of this country.
Do you think that this administration will ever be held accountable?
I mean, I don't think there's any way to answer that question. I think that, I mean, that plays directly into why the hell am I here? Why am I still here? Well, two reasons. One of it is accountability, but not just accountability for January 6th, not just accountability for the four corners of that day. I mean, we were like halfway there in, arresting and convicting, the 1,000+ people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th and committed acts of violence or broke the law. I mean, we still didn't even come close to arresting every single person that committed a crime at the Capitol that day. But we never even began to investigate the individuals that were the orchestrators, the people that use their positions to peddle lies about election fraud and the election deniers. And it starts with then President Donald Trump, people like Steve Bannon, but then you have the 147 members of Congress that voted against certifying the election. And they did it now, we know, based on absolutely no evidence whatsoever. And what they did was they lent the credibility of their office, their position of authority, their elected position, to that argument that maybe there was something wrong here. But then we saw 60 to 64 court cases play out all across the country before a whole variety of different judges, some appointed by conservative Republicans, some appointed by Democrats, all of whom unanimously said there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that fraud in that election was rampant and that it was widespread and that it would have had any impact. I think in the one case that they found, they actually found that the fraud benefited Donald Trump. And so those lies are what inspired those Americans to come to the Capitol for the Stop the Steal rally and then march to the Capitol and attack law enforcement officers. And listen, they made their own decisions and they're responsible for their own actions. But, I also recognize the fact that, many of those people were lied to. They were tricked. And unfortunately, by pardoning all of them, you interrupt their ability to recognize their mistakes, but you also send a very, very dangerous message that if you commit acts of violence on behalf of this administration, that you will be absolved of all criminal culpability. And we've now seen that play out over and over and over and over again. I said many, many times, no one has done more to normalize and to advocate for political violence than Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, the stochastic terrorism.
Right. Yeah.
So we know that you got to know lots of members of Congress. And someone here asks, of all the members of Congress that you've interacted with, who do you think was the most dangerous to the country? Who was the most disingenuous? And who was the most devoid of intelligence?
That last one is tough. I mean, there's you got Lauren Boebert is just an absolute fucking idiot. But so is Marjorie Taylor Greene.
She bailed though.
Yeah, but I think that was, there's, it was not some come to Jesus moment. What Marjorie Taylor Greene saw was the writing on the wall. After her recent election win, she was what she wanted was to run for Senate. And the Trump administration said, absolutely not. We won't endorse you. We won't back you. The RNC wouldn't back you. So she wanted to move up in the party. She wanted, more positions of authority within the administration. You remember she had been barred her first term from serving on any committees. She wanted some high-powered committees, and they weren't going to give them to her. Why? Because she's a fucking bubbling idiot. And even Donald Trump, I'm sure, looks at her with a tremendous amount of disdain, just like he looks at all of his, MAGA folks. And so she did, what she felt was in her best interest, which was, she left Congress, but she left the day after that she was entitled to receiving her, retirement from Congress, which is you got to do away with that. Nobody should get retirement from Congress. Like you stop working, you go home and you get another job and get paid that way. So those two I think are like neck and neck. And I guess because then Marjorie Taylor Greene's no longer there, that Lauren Boebert takes home that trophy. Disingenuous, I don't know, that's like damn near the entire Republican Party in this moment. Because there's a few there's like the Andy Biggses of the world that are just like diehard, like white supremacists, like white Christian nationalists, true believers. But the vast majority of them are just like, whatever I got to do to keep getting my government paycheck, because in the reality of things, this is not a particularly difficult job. If you actually break down the calendar that these guys come to Washington, D.C., it's not a lot. And I'm really sorry that periodically throughout the day while you're, interacting with big money donors and corporate lobbyists, you've got to go walk, 150 steps to go cast your vote for some bill and then come back to whining and dining with, it's just, I've seen the way that, and it's not all of them, but it's far too many. And it's become far too commonplace. And so that, I think that's the other part of my accountability message is we need accountability for the crimes that this administration has committed, but we also need to be more civically engaged because that's a form of accountability too. There's a tremendous amount of engagement in this moment. The one thing that the Trump administration has done right, and we were talking about this before, is that they have adversely impacted so many Americans so quickly into this administration that they've pissed off everyone and gotten everyone involved. They've radicalized suburban mothers, and people who are working multiple jobs, who don't have time to spend with their own families, are setting aside a sliver of their lives to be engaged in their community politically. And so that, spells a lot of trouble for this administration, but we need to keep that going. And we also need to teach, the younger generations. I was shocked with all the kids that I talked to find out that they don't teach civics anymore in high school. I guess politicians really do want us dumb and naive about the process. And so, organizing, volunteering for candidates, helping fundraise for candidates, which is especially key component of that because elections are costly, and if we want to elect candidates that don't take corporate PAC money, then we're going to have to dig into our own pockets and find out creative ways of replacing that money so that they can get elected, and then holding them accountable when they go to office and making sure that they pass that legislation that bars elected officials from taking corporate PAC money, real campaign finance reform. But it's the idea that we don't just cast a ballot every 2-4 years, that we actually hold these candidates, even ones that we support, especially the ones that we support, when they let us down. Where's a clearer example of that than right here in Bradford?
We are so let down. And I think on this accountability piece,
I would use the word betrayed.
But yeah, I call him Fetterman the Betrayer. I like that, like fully medieval, you know, Fetterman the Betrayer.
I call him figure eight Fetterman. Oh, did we lose the sound?
We're back. We can also, when we're holding school board candidates accountable, we can ask them about the civics education piece. You know, because that accountability, and I love that, means showing up for the details.
Yeah.
And that's an important detail to all of you.
But I mean, you know, again, like, there's a lot of things that our educational system is lacking for. I think it's up to, you know, I view, like, I'm responsible. If they're not going to teach it in my kids' public school, like, I'm going to tell my kids at least the basics about how to stay and get civically engaged. The other thing is, you know, I've learned a lot of lessons over the past 5 years and seeing, like, what actually works. And one of the fun things that I get to do is I get to travel the country and talk to people who are, you know, outraged, who are, you know, engaged like you guys are, but also don't know if what they're doing is actually making a difference. And I can tell you, because I'm looking at things from like the 30,000 foot level, and it is working. And I am an internal pessimist. I never think anything is going to work, and I always think the worst outcome is going to come about. And like even now, I have a tremendous amount of optimism for, you know, for the future of the country, because so many people are seeing what's happening, and they're getting involved. And I think we have an opportunity in this moment, because things have gotten so bad, to fundamentally change the way that we do politics in this country, and the type of candidates that we put forward to represent us. I mean, I think that probably more so than ever, like we had this idea, at least, I don't know if I had it, but I just kind of went along with it, the idea that these, you know, like a millionaire and a billionaire must be an extremely successful human being, and so of course we want to be represented by these successful people. Well, I've hung out with some million and billionaires. I don't want them anywhere near me. I don't want to hang out with them. I don't want to drink a beer with them. I literally, I don't want to be in that space, like, at all. Like, I want people that represent me, that understand, not in the abstract, the type of problems that I'm going through, not because they read it in some book or they learned about it in some, you know, advanced level college course in sociology. Like, I want them to understand the problems that I'm going through, because they're going through those same exact problems. I want them to understand, you know, what it's like to have purchased a house right before the, you know, housing market crash and have it foreclosed, because they did the same thing too. What it's like to, you know, to be in credit card debt because they're in credit card debt too. Like, I want them to have the exact same life experience that I have, because that's the person that's going to go there and fix the problems that I have, because they're the same problems that they have. And so, you know, I think now more than ever, like, working people in this country have an opportunity to put those candidates forward and demand better from the political party apparatus that we have. And when I say that, you know, we really only have a one-party system left in this country. You have a Republican Party that has been completely corrupted and corroded by an anti-American fascist movement that we've all come to know and love as MAGA. And then you have a Democratic Party that seems incapable of rising to meet the moment, and to understanding, you know, the outrage of the people. And it's, I guess this goes into disingenuous. And I've never met with them, but I've listened to them speak enough, and I'll talk to Democratic leadership, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, and listen to them talk about what's happening to all of us under the foot of this administration as, like, politically advantageous. Like, how callous can you be as a human being to watch the suffering of others and say, we're going to crush it in the midterms? Like, that's not what No Kings 1 and No Kings 2 were all about. The people that I talked to that participated in those, the vast majority of which were first-time protesters. In fact, I was a first-time protester at No Kings 1. I was in Leesburg, Virginia with a couple buddies of mine, and then I was at No Kings 2 in Washington, D.C. Those are the first two protests I ever attended on that side of the police line. But that was a mandate, a demand from the American people to fight the administration, to fight tooth and nail, to save this country and save our democracy. And Democrats were just like, well, hang in there till the midterms. I think that in lies exactly why so many people are disillusioned with American politics. In the past, so few people were engaged. Why our voter rate or voter percentages are so low in this country. It's because people feel like they don't have a voice and they're not represented by the party, because the parties have become, at least until MAGA came along, essentially a mirror image of themselves. They're made up of mostly like elitist, uber wealthy individuals who were beholden to corporate interests and not to the American people. And so I see this as a prime opportunity for us to change that, because we are actually leading the fight for democracy, not the politicians. They're playing catch up. Every time we come out and demand something, every time we hit the streets, every time we're filming ICE and CBP and demanding accountability for that, it's the politicians that are like trailing so fucking far behind, and eventually they catch up. But then we've moved on to the next issue. And so I think that, we just push forward with that momentum, and we push forward with it into the midterm elections and start demanding a different kind of candidate. And not being afraid the primary existing candidates, if they're at least not willing to sit down with us, engage with us, and listen to the demands and make those changes. Now, I'm not saying you got to throw the baby out with bathwater with all of these candidates, but like if they're not willing to fight, then they got to go.
And sit down with all of us, because I think one of the things people didn't notice about our senator was he avoided black voters like the plague.
Apparently he avoids every voter like the plague.
Well, that too. But during the election season, he canceled every event he was supposed to have with black voters.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to Fetterman specifically, it seems to me like it doesn't seem like there was a lot of, it was like him running against Mehmet Oz, who, obviously is a nut job. Although now I'm starting to wonder, like, who was actually worse. But I don't know, like, I think that there just wasn't a lot known about him previously, and he said some of the right things. But I think that he's really shown his true colors as to who he is as a person. And I know that, when his campaign had initially reached out to me, because I did a video supporting his campaign years ago, and they told me he's a staunch, Democrat, working class guy, supporter of, accountability for January 6th. And then somebody sent me a picture, and it's just like this big, bald dude in a Carhartt. And I was like, oh, maybe he is a working class guy. And then you just come to find out that guy's cosplaying as a working man. He's never had a job. He's a trust fund baby. And you could say that he joined AmeriCorps. And, well, listen, dude, I know a lot of people that joined organizations like that that were rich sons of, rich families that did it to avoid actually having to work for a living. That volunteering is great, and doing those types of things is great for a time being. But if you're going to be representing a community, I think you should at least understand what it means to have to balance your checkbook and pay your bills. And I remember the first troublesome statement that I learned about his, in retrospect, was, when he complained to a reporter that suggested that, he got bailed out by mommy and daddy because he was the mayor of Braddock and he only made $150 a week. And I said, well, maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe he got paid $150 a week because that's the amount of work that being the mayor of Braddock at the time required. And then the other thing is, I've worked a lot of jobs in my life where the initial income was not enough to support myself. And you know what I did? I got another job, or I worked overtime. And so that started to worry me. And then you started to see this pattern behavior that, came out. And what's most troubling to me about Fetterman now is not as much the poor policy choices that he makes. It's just his utter disdain and callousness that he shows towards his own constituents. And it's this condescending, let's call it what it is. It's the rich kid attitude. I know better. I went to fucking Harvard. And what you guys don't know what you're talking about. And that's not how this is supposed to work. And so I think that you guys could do a hell of a whole lot better, and you deserve a hell of a whole lot better.
I know, can you recall a senator?
No, you can't recall a senator, and we've prayed.
You're stuck.
We're praying fiercely, but the only hope is for him to resign. So I ask him to resign regularly. It could happen. I'm going to ask.
You know what? The one thing that, and I consider him to be full-blown MAGA. And the one thing that MAGA doesn't experience is shame. There's no shame, as they say, in their game at all. And so unfortunately, I think you're just going to have to let nature take its course.
Nature can be a bitch. Anyway, I think a lot of signs that say resign, John, and getting reminded daily would be a good plan. There's lots of questions about your relationship with your fellow officers. Have you gotten support from them? This person says we have your back.
Yeah.
They want to know, what has it been like with your fellow officers after this?
So I think initially after Jan 6, if you look at kind of the evolution of my outspokenness, it was born out of a deep desire to acknowledge the courage, the selflessness of all these officers that I witnessed on January 6th. That was why I did the first interview that I did. It had nothing to do with at that time there wasn't a contradictory narrative about January 6th. We still had Kevin McCarthy had come out on the House floor and condemned Donald Trump and said that he was responsible. Mitch McConnell did the same thing on the Senate floor. There was this moment of unity in which everybody was, capable of calling it exactly what it was, which was an insurrection, and that Donald Trump was responsible. And so my focus was, let's get some recognition for these officers. In a moment in which, policing and police reform and police accountability were a part of the national conversation, I thought that, while it's important to acknowledge our shortcomings, and I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that policing in this country is above reproach or reform, but I thought it was also important that we acknowledge, when officers do their job. And I say that because the vast majority of those officers that stood shoulder to shoulder with me inside the Lower West Terrace Tunnel, I know for a fact, supported Donald Trump. And so they were capable of placing their, political persuasions aside and honoring their oath and doing their job, which is something that escapes Republican members of Congress and the Senate. And so, yeah, that was what I was looking for. And I mean, during that time when I was advocating for acknowledgement, I was very popular in the police department. I mean, there was certainly like kind of that, oh, he's just doing it for the attention. And I mean, any law enforcement officers in here? Like our community eats its own sometimes. And so like there was like a lot of that kind of high school bullshit. But it wasn't until I did an interview with Don Lemon, and during that interview, he asked me about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. And it was funny to me because everybody that I knew that was a cop agreed with my viewpoint, which was the fact that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And I went into kind of explaining my thoughts on it, and I remember Don asked me, do you think that Derek Chauvin was a racist? And I said, I don't know if Derek Chauvin was a racist. I've never met the guy. But I can tell you that he lost sight of George Floyd's humanity. And he no longer saw George Floyd as a human being. He saw him as an animal, and he treated him as such. And while I thought it was important to condemn that action and that behavior, and he's certainly where he belongs, which is in prison, I also thought that it was important to try to start a conversation about how is it that officers get to that point? How is it that this guy that was a 19-year law enforcement veteran gets to the point where he loses sight of a person's humanity? And it's a cultural issue within the community of law enforcement, and it really starts with I think how we measure success in policing, which is how many arrests did you make? I mean, for the better part of my career, that was the metric that we used to measure success. And so a natural byproduct of that is that you are going to view the community as an adversarial entity. And that's what happened. And I never killed anybody, thank God. But I certainly saw myself in Derek Chauvin at times, where I interacted with people in the community, and I policed with my ego, something I talk about a lot, and that how dare you question me, and how dare I told you what to do, why are you not doing it? And then recognizing the fact that, like, who the fuck wants to go to jail? Like, nobody wants to go to jail. And developing alternatives to, strong arming and manhandling people, which, by the way, puts the officer in a tremendous amount of danger anytime you have to go hands-on with an individual. That's something you want to avoid at all costs. And so when I started talking about things like that, the community was not happy. Even though they agreed with me, it was this idea that I was talking about things that, and representing the community in a way that that they just weren't accustomed to. They went outside of those norms. And so that's when I started getting a lot of internal backlash. And then my congressional testimony was like a whole other animal. It was not supported by the department. It was not sanctioned by the department. They did not want me testifying. They told me that I was not allowed to wear my uniform, that if I was going to testify, it was going to be in my personal capacity. Obviously, I wore my uniform, and I told them to fuck themselves. Because I wasn't there in my personal capacity. I didn't go to the Capitol as Michael Fanone. I went to the Capitol as a Metropolitan Police Officer. And so that's how I was going to represent, my testimony before the committee. And so, yeah, it's and I don't know the reasons behind, I think that if I was to surmise, I think part of it is the fact that law enforcement didn't want to shine a light on their failures and shortcomings of that day. But I also think they were terrified of a police officer that had the amount of internal knowledge that I had about the department, speaking out without any parameters other than the truth. And so, unfortunately, today, like, I have very few relationships with any of my former colleagues. Even my old partner Jimmy, I haven't spoken to him in probably 2 years. And it's sad. For my law enforcement brothers and sisters in here, that you have a tendency to, that becomes like an intimate part of your life. Those are your family. That's your social life is spent with these people. And losing that, I think it was just one of the many betrayals that I think I experienced in the aftermath of January 6th. Because there are some people that were in that tunnel that I have spoken about highly, that I respect for what they did that day, that I despised when I was a cop, that I thought were just the biggest pieces of shit. But I'm also capable of recognizing selflessness, courage, and bravery when I see it, and differentiating the two. And so, yeah, it sucks that there's that I don't get the support from the police community.
Let's go with this one. Consequences are important to all of us. Many of these questions are about consequences and how we get consequences. Susan's concern here is that will consequences turn to poisonous retribution? How do we get consequences without poisonous retribution?
It's the rule of law. We follow the rule of law. That's, on paper, when politicians and people without integrity get involved in the criminal justice system, it actually, has the ability to work quite well. But I think we need people like Jack Smith. Who literally exudes integrity and honor. I went to listen to him testify in that congressional hearing just to sit in the same room as the guy and listen to him speak. I've never encountered a person like that in my entire life, let alone in the law enforcement profession. Tremendously committed to fairness, and here's a guy that had the courage to come before the American people publicly and testify that his investigation resulted in a conclusion that, with proof beyond a reasonable doubt, Donald Trump defrauded the American people. And what that means is somebody who's testified in one of those hearings, I know the backlash that comes with that, the death threats, and the impact that it can have on not only your life, but the lives of your loved ones and your friends and family members. And so, you pursue it through the justice system with people, with honorable people that, that follow the rule of law and adhere to the Constitution. You're sorry.
Yeah, you offered earlier, and I'm sure you continue to believe it. The other thing is about asking when someone's running for office, are they going to seek accountability and to vote it in to what we went out of our politicians?
Yeah, listen, I think that there's certain policy discussions you can have with politicians where you ask for certain things. Accountability should be a demand. Accountability should be the bare minimum for, putting people in power in this upcoming election cycle. If you're not capable of committing to investigating this administration and its crimes in such a, overwhelming or tremendous, at such a tremendous scale, then you've got no business serving in politics at this moment. Wait 10, 15 years when we right this ship and get things back together, and then you can go in there and do whatever. But right now, we need accountability candidates. We need people that are going to participate in what my buddy Eric Swalwell described as like a presidential commission to investigate the crimes of this administration. The other thing we need from these politicians is the ability to, for Christ's sake, can you walk and chew gum at the same time? We can pursue accountability and also pursue affordability. It's not like you just have to dedicate your life to one singular issue. And all of these things are important. So focus on both.
We're going to take this one last because that's going to bring down the house here. I know y'all. Have you heard any remorse or apologies from the insurrectionists? Is somebody optimistic?
Yes and no. So the 6 individuals that pled guilty to assaulting me, I think only one of them actually apologized during his hearing. His name is Thomas Civic, and he's a particularly pathetic guy from Buffalo, New York. This is a guy that basically was like a fuck up his entire life, and his daddy, who was wealthy, always bailed him out of every situation. And this was no different. His dad called me a piece of shit in the well of the courtroom after his son was sentenced, because they were pushing for, no sense. If you're not familiar with Thomas Civic, he's the one that ripped my badge off of my vest, and he stole my police radio. He later threw the police radio in a dumpster, according to him, but he buried my badge in his backyard as some type of keepsake or memento from the dead. And then later, after lying numerous times to FBI investigators, finally admitted that he had done that. It was on video, but admitted, and then turned the badge over to the police. And so when he was arrested, he was incarcerated. Initially, he was held pending his trial. And his lawyer made plea after plea to the judge saying that, he's not eating, he can't sleep, the food's not good. So the judge released him to home confinement. And while he was on home confinement, I got a call from the prosecutor on the case. And she said, "Hey, I'm just giving you an update. We have a hearing coming up regarding this case." And I was like, "Oh, what is it about?" She's like, "Well, he's asking so he's barred from using social media. He's barred from the internet. He can't do any of those things. He can only watch a certain amount of news every day. It has to be from certain news networks. But he's asking to be able to use Tinder and Bumble." And I was like, I've been a cop for 20 years. I have never once even heard of anything like that. And I remember calling buddies of mine, and I asked the prosecutor, and I asked a couple of buddy prosecutors. They were like, "Man, this is the first." And they all went to the hearing because they just wanted to hear this guy actually ask. And But it's funny. But then I also, I'm thinking to myself, like, here's a guy who, like, rightfully so, was arrested and was incarcerated pending trial because he is a danger to himself and the public. And he was released. He was given an opportunity to go home. And what does he decide, to do with his time? Well, he asked the judge to use dating apps. Like, that's what he's doing with his time. And so I remember delivering my victim impact statement, and he gave this long, like, I'm so sorry, and you're a hero, and blah, 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 blah. And I went up there, I didn't write shit down, no notes. And I just went into the fact that, like, this is what he did. He was arrested. He was, these are the charges that are against him. By the way, he actually has an extensive criminal history before this. And you let him out, Your Honor. And after you let him out, he asks to use dating apps. And I think that she had forgotten that. And in that moment, handed down, I think, what was a heavier sentence than even the prosecution had asked for. And that's what sparked the outburst from his dad was, that his son now actually was going to be held accountable for his actions. And that he saw me, and this is the perversion of the truth that these, insurrectionists forward is like, it's the officer's fault. It's the police officer in uniform that went to the Capitol to prevent these people from committing crimes. And protecting the people inside because, they were saying things like, hang Mike Pence and, we're going to kill Nancy Pelosi. But it was my fault that his son was going to jail. And so that was it. The rest of these guys, nothing. Most of them declined to give a statement. And then Daniel Rodriguez, the guy that drove a stun gun into my neck, he famously shouted, some MAGA forever and Donald Trump won, as he was being carted off to serve his 12-and-a-half-year sentence. But he's now been pardoned and, lives in California. Yeah.
One of them was rearrested recently.
So I don't think any of the guys that assaulted me have been rearrested, but there have been over 30 plus individuals that were charged with crimes that day, that were arrested and convicted and pardoned, that have now been rearrested. The vast majority of which for, like really insignificant crimes like raping kids and murder. So great job on that one, Donald Trump. Thanks for, keeping us all safe and making this country great again.
In the book, you talk about finding out democracy was fragile. So I was surprised to realize that democracy is fragile. You want to talk a little bit about how democracy is fragile and what we can do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that, well, first of all, like, I was a staunch believer in American exceptionalism. That's what led me after 9/11 to join the police department. I believed that things that I saw play out in other places that I read about in the history books were not possible here. What happened in 1930s or 1920s to 30s Germany up until the Second World War could never happen here. That Americans are just not. Like, we're a different breed. And I also was a believer in our institutions and the checks and balances that we had in this country. I guess I just never anticipated the type of people that this country is capable of producing, and that they would ever be elevated to positions of power in those institutions. And so, we've literally it took 250 years to build this country, this democracy, and we've literally watched it be decimated in a matter of a year, less than that. I mean, it took Adolf Hitler, I think, 3 years to destroy fucking Germany, and Donald Trump did it in record speed. So, there's another award that he can add to his list of participation trophies. So, Department of Justice. How scary is it that we have this Department of Justice that's completely corrupted and corroded, and that we have Pam Bondi, who is the most corrupt attorney general that we've ever seen in the history of this country, which is actually saying something, because we've had some fucked up ones. And it's just completely beholden to Donald Trump. Donald Trump tweets, "I want to see this person prosecuted," and they get prosecuted. Now, fortunately, we have the court system, which to some extent has held. We do have a corrupted Supreme Court, which is terrifying because we're watching cases eventually make their way to the Supreme Court. Excuse me, and then they do crazy ass shit that makes absolutely no sense, and that departs from If you're familiar with the way the criminal justice system works, especially on the judicial side, everything is based off of precedent. So somebody did something 100 years ago and they got sentenced for it, and then all the sentences for similar crimes are based off of that one sentence. And the way that we interpret the law is based on prior interpretations of the law. And that's actually the conservative viewpoint as to how we're supposed to be interpreting. That's like right out of Justice Scalia's playbook. Like, it's all supposed to be predicated on previous interpretation, going back to George Washington. And so now you're seeing a Supreme Court completely deviate from precedent and just say that no, this is what it's not been done this way ever in the history of the legal system, but we're just going to change that today because Donald Trump wants it that way. And that's terrifying. Watching the premier law enforcement agency in this country, which is the FBI, and I again, be gutted by the administration, completely gutted. And then the remnants of it be, again, corrupted and corroded into Donald Trump's political vengeance apparatus. I mean, we can look at these cases, Letitia James' prosecution, James Comey's prosecution, Don Lemon's prosecution, and say that, inevitably, like, Comey and James prevailed, their cases were essentially tossed out. There was a whole lot of shenanigans that took place in the Eastern District of Virginia when it came to, I think her name is Halligan, the prosecutor that they put there who had absolutely no prosecutorial experience, which is, seems to be a common thread in the way that Donald Trump chooses people to run these institutions. But the fact that people are even being subjected to that, they still have to pay for their legal fees, and it ain't cheap. We're talking, in the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend against these cases, and James Comey is a career public servant. The guy's not a multimillionaire, and even if he was, the fact that you would have to spend your money to defend against utter bullshit is crazy. And it's eventually it's going to have a trickle down effect, and it's going to get to us. For the high crime of speaking out against the administration. That's the next step. I mean, that's kind of what they're normalizing these political prosecutions and preparing, trying to strike fear in the average American, but also preparing, everything that this administration does is kind of like a precursor to what's in the not so distant future. And they also like to telegraph, talking about using ICE and CBP to surround polling stations. I think it's high time that we start believing Donald Trump when he said shit like that. He's got a good track record.
I absolutely agree with you, and it's been a long and extraordinary evening. We are extremely grateful for you coming. I'm going to read the last card. It's from a special friend of Indivisible Pittsburgh. I was a member of Congress on January 6th, and I never got to thank you for risking your life for us. No matter what the critics say, you have courage. Thank you, Connor.
Well. Thank you. And wasn't Connor Lamb running again?
Oh, yeah, that happened. It was really. Where is he's here somewhere? I don't know. There he is. I knocked doors for Connor Lamb. I am so proud that I knocked doors for Connor Lamb. I went and got the baddest black woman I could find and knocked doors for Connor Lamb. Me and Michelle Kinney, who is Anton Rose's mother, knocked doors for Connor Lamb because I was upset. And that was the most dramatic thing I could think of doing.
I was like, I just discovered Connor Lamb recently, and now we follow each other on the gram. But I remember on this trip up here, I was like, I gotta do a deep dive on Connor Lamb because I just did my deep dive on John Fetterman, and maybe Connor Lamb's got some crazy ass skeletons in his closet. How did that happen? And then I read the shit and I'm like, what the fuck happened? Here's the perfect candidate, and here's this I don't know, was it the Carhartt that won you guys over?
Yeah, but the Carhartt store closed.
But I will say this, if Connor, if you run again, I don't know if you're where you're at in your process of
he's going
making
up
that
for
decision.
see?
I will come up here and I will knock all the fucking doors on your behalf. So no. Hey, we're all just doing our job, man.
Look at me on team Connor Lamb should run again. This is working for me. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. It's been an extraordinary evening, an extraordinary day. I thought I'd be tired now when I'm fired up. So this is really lovely.
Good.
Thank you all. We really appreciate you. We have, yes, ma'am. Just say it, Tracy.
Donate to Michael Fanone's GoFundMe so that he can do this all over the country.
Oh yeah. That's an awful part. So yeah. So I don't have any sponsors. I don't have any this is literally a crowd-funded thing where people donate. Mostly, I think my average donation is between $1 and $5, and that's what sends me all over the country and gives me an opportunity to talk with organizations that may not have the funding to to pay my travel and lodging and shit like that. So and I don't take any money for doing things like this. Contrary to what all the MAGA trolls that jump in my comments, I don't charge anything. So
he is not only not charged, but this evening will help support the important work of No Kings 3 on the 28th. Thanks to our partnership with the Steel City Stonewall Democrats, which are the Pittsburgh's LGBTQ Democrats who are always standing 10 toes down and organized. So they helped us get this evening together.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much.